like a minute.
So
let's see how it goes here.
Yeah. All right, let me get these watch parties up too.
Chris, you sound like you about to DJ something.
I know, right?
All right, we up on YouTube there.
All right.
What's going on, YouTube fam?
Hey.
What's up?
Facebook, I guess, is not going to go live for another like 10 seconds or so.
Gotcha.
But
Nah, you live on Facebook right now, fam.
Oh, so it's live.
I'm watching you right now.
I don't know why mine didn't pop up. Let me see if I can. Cool. There we go. Oh, we live. Cool.
Let me know when people are in there because I can't see inside.
I'm not even gonna try. My computer gonna shut down.
I tried.
Yeah, I got the watch party popping right now on the ADOS group.
There we go. What's going on, family? We're gonna give it like another about a minute or so. Let people stream in, and then we're gonna get this thing going.
It makes sense with all that Breaking Brown music to get people in.
I was trying to figure that out. Yeah. And for all those popping on, if you haven't yet, like blackcivics.com, you guys can subscribe to our email list, anchor.fm/blackcivics. Check out our past podcasts. You can go on iTunes, all of that stuff, Spotify.
All that good stuff.
Cool. All right, we got a few people on YouTube there. What's going on, Otis? Rashid, what's up? All right, let's
see Lisa. Okay. I had to hop on.
This thing
hey, fam. What's up, Jared? What's up, Sherry? What's up to the Facebook fam? I see y'all. What's going on?
Nice. Let's go ahead and let's get this thing kicked off, Ken.
Welcome to Black Civics. Black Civics is an educational program dedicated to supporting the ADOS community through podcasts, videos, and courses that will elevate our civic awareness. Together, we discuss politics and government, public policy, political activism, and much more, all in a way that's easy to understand and helps you learn. Black Civics is brought to you by Kimberly Renee Davis, Tony Blount, and Chris Lodgson. Again, welcome.
Yes. Thank you for everyone streaming in. And today we're going to do our first live podcast. We're going to talk about small business. We're going to be talking about real estate, stuff like rental real estate and personal investments, and kind of just break down how COVID-19 has impacted those, specifically for ADOS. We'll be taking questions at the end, and I hope it's super informative for everyone. And this will be part of an ongoing series, COVID-19 and the ADOS community.
Okay. Well, now, if you haven't checked out all 4 of the Black Civics episodes, I recommend that you do that. However, there is one in particular I recommend you listen to if you're new to Black Civics, which is the first episodes of Black Civics, entitled ADOS 101. That particular episode was inspired by thought leaders Yvette Carnell and Tone Talks, who could both be found on YouTube. And Black Civics podcast can be found by subscribing to our Facebook page or website, www.blackcivics.com, as Tony just said, and wherever podcasts are streamed. And also, Brother Tony Blount just created a new Black Civics YouTube channel, so please subscribe. Now, you already introduced the topics, so I'll go ahead and introduce the guests. We have 3 special guests with us today, and we're doing this very special Black Civics podcast regarding COVID-19. Speaking on small business legislation, we have Black Civics Zone, Brother Chris Lodgson. Speaking on investments in real estate, we have Czarina Harris, who is the CEO of The Note Firm. And speaking on small business, we have Idara Phillips, who is the owner of Zip Business Services in California. I believe that's Elk Grove, which is who we're going to start with. Right, Tony?
Yes. So, Idara, thank you again for coming on. taking your time out with Black Civics here today. The first question we have for you, what should ADOS businesses be doing right now to survive COVID-19? And is that different for like people who are independent contractors or self-employed, such as like barbers, salons, personal trainers?
Oh, thanks, Tony. That's a good question. Right now, the number one thing that businesses should be doing is cash, managing your cash flow. That's going to be the number one most important thing that businesses can do. At this time, we don't know how long COVID-19 is going to happen. We don't know if they're going to open the world back up next week. We don't know if they're going to open it back up 3 months from now. So managing your cash, really having plans in place. If you didn't have a budget before, you need to start budgeting. You need to start doing things such as cash flow projections so that you can see where your money's going, how you're spending your money, and if there are any ways of adjusting your spending or looking for alternate methods of income to substitute the cash that you're missing. Right now, it's not the time for people to just really, I mean, there's government programs out and they're awesome, but when you get that cash, how are you going to manage it, right? So that's going to be the number one most important thing to survive this COVID-19 and then even going forward, because we don't know what the economy is going to be like after COVID-19.
So kind of following up with that cash flow conversation, like what are some ways that the businesses can manage their cash flow, or there's some resources you would advise people to check out if they're not sure of kind of where to start or how to rein that in?
Okay. Good question. I'm kind of biased because I'm an accountant. But I've run into almost every single small business I've ever met. They don't have accountants. And I always say it this way. If you get sick, you go to the doctors, right? That's what they specialize in, is making people healthy. If your car breaks down, you go to a mechanic, because that's who specializes in fixing your car. Right now is the time for people to start building relationships with accountants, bookkeepers, people who have spent I specialize in helping businesses. I specialize in helping businesses, and people always think that we're just here to do numbers. Numbers are just the numbers tell me what you're doing in your business. So there's a lot of bookkeepers, there's a lot of consultants, accountants. You could go to your local SBA. They have resources, that you don't have to pay for. Go on YouTube, look at YouTube how to do a cash flow projection or how to do a budget. If you don't know Excel, YouTube, Excel basics. But now's the time for people to really empower themselves and educate themselves, and then also seek out advice for those of us who have spent our careers and all of our education, and all we studied is how to make businesses successful and survive times like this.
I dig. And I would actually say, as a side note, that just kind of spurred me thinking about something, just everything you were just saying for small businesses, for those with their personal finances, do the same thing. Do the same thing in terms of really figuring out how to rein it in.
If you get a budget spreadsheet, you can apply it to your business and apply it to your house. It's kind of like when we were young. I know my mom, she used to balance her checkbook. And she used to sit me down and she used to balance her checkbook. People don't balance their checkbooks anymore, right?
No.
You just spend. And you don't even know what you're spending your money on. I have people all the time tell me, I can't afford that. And I'm looking at their books and I'm like, you can afford that because you spend 3 times that. You just don't realize it. So now's the time to really realize what you're spending money on. Even myself, I'm not driving around. I have so much more money. I was like, I didn't realize I was spending that much money on gas. Right. So everything else in my house is going normal. But I was like, I was spending hundreds of dollars every month on gas. So now's the time just to really look at where your finances are going. And then also it's a time to start to educate yourself. We have more time and less time, right? I have more time, but I have less time because now my kids aren't in school. So I have more time and less time. But I've never sat down and really read a bill that was passed by Congress. Like, never before have I done it. I've never really just sat down and read a bill. I might have had assignments to read something, but in my life, just myself, I've never been like, let me just see what Congress passed today, right? I sat down and I wanted to see what passed in the new bill that passed last week, because last week they passed the new update to the CARES Act.
Yep.
And everybody was talking about that, but I also saw like they passed a bunch of money going to cruise ships, and they passed another bill for something else. I'm like, wait, they passed like 5 bills today,
more
not
bailouts.
Just that one, right? Mm-hmm. So everyone's just talking about that one, but when I looked, I'm like, they just gave like the cruise ships just about as much money as they give small businesses, right? So this is a time to educate yourself, learn how to navigate some of these different websites and resources, because you'll empower yourself. It'll make your business stronger long run.
Yeah.
Over the long run, you know.
Definitely. So for those businesses that are, you know, in a cash strap position, or they need, you know, more to be able to get through this, do you know of any possible loans that they can apply for? The best way for them to go about trying to get that extra funding to float them through this hard time?
Well, I mean, I think most people have heard now that the federal government's doing the Paycheck Protection Program, right? And the main purpose of that loan is to substitute your employees' pay, or subsidize your employees' pay for 8 weeks. So that's to cover your paycheck. It also covers part of your rent and utilities. So that program received an extra $310 billion of funding yesterday. And you apply for that through the bank. You would have to go to your local, your bank that you have a banking relationship. They always say go there first because they have some information on you. There's also a lot of small community banks. The community banks were allocated $60 billion so that they can reach the smaller owned businesses, the minority owned businesses, because they found that, you know, the large corporations were getting most of the money before. And they think that like most of the Black business owners would have banked with a smaller bank. I myself in my practice have seen the opposite, but I do see that we all banked at the same bank that didn't have any money, which was Wells Fargo. I don't know why. But I went out to a third party bank, and they also have like fintechs, the financial institutions such as PayPal, Square, Fundera that you can go to. People are having success there. The banks are still coming and saying, you need to have a bank account with us. You need to have had a bank account by February 15th or January 1st. So you can't just open a bank account. But if you find some of the online banks, such as Cross River Bank, they're accepting applications from anyone. Even PayPal, you can go on PayPal and apply. I do my bookkeeping with QuickBooks. QuickBooks Capital is accepting applications. Most of these third parties, they weren't SBA lenders when this program first started. So they got into the game like the day before the money ran out. But but during that week when they were trying to pass that other bill, they got their systems up and running. So try those third parties if you can't get into the bank. And they also said you can apply at multiple places. They told each big bank that they can only do $60 billion worth of loans. So try some of the small ones, because the big banks have the big companies go to big banks, right? So are getting $5 million loans, $10 million loans. The money is going to go faster than if you go to the banks where they are, you know, doing $5,000 loans or $10,000 loans. That's one program. They had the EIDL loans that also received extra money through the SBA, but they aren't taking any applications right now. They're still trying to fund the people who applied before. So I'm still getting reports of people that I helped apply within the first 2 or 3 days that it was open, and they're barely receiving funds. Still, some people still haven't received funds. Once the EIDL opens up, I feel that that's a better option for most of the small Black businesses. And when I say small is considered 500 employees or less. The Paycheck Protection Program is awesome, especially because it's forgivable. And if it's not forgivable, it's 1%. But the way they're calculating the numbers, most businesses, unless you have all your employees on payroll and unless the owner's on payroll, they're not going to receive a lot of money, because they're pulling your net income, your line 31 from your Schedule C. And that's your income after all your expenses and after all your tax write-offs, your business tax write-offs. And everybody tries to get that number low so that they don't have to pay taxes, right? A lot of taxes. Well, if that number is low, you take that number divided by 12 and times it by 2.5, that's what you're going to get. So most people, when I sit down and do the math, I tell them you're better off applying for unemployment. Today in California, the pandemic unemployment opened up, and that's going to be $767 a week from March 29th until July 25th. And then the dates before that, from February 2nd to March 28th, and then from July 26th on to the end of the year, it's 167, but they might fund that more. So if I'm looking at people's, I tell people if you didn't bring in close to your bottom line is at least like 30,000, you might want to look at unemployment. And that's where you need to really like do the math, right? But I do want to remind people, if they go and get the unemployment, which is something that they might qualify more than for a loan, right? You don't need any qualifications right now. Self-employed, gig workers, Uber workers can go get unemployment now. You could do DoorDash and you could get unemployment. Before you couldn't do that. They're giving out, I think I've calculated like $3,058 a month on unemployment right now. So most people aren't going to get that through the PPP. So for the employees and even for the business owners, unless you were a corporation, that's probably a better option than what they're going to give you. Because I've seen people with $30,000 bottom line, and when I do the math, they're not going to get $3,000 a month. So just remember that unemployment's taxable income. So you need to put a little bit of it aside, for tax time. But there's loans out there. The state's supposed to be coming out with programs. I would say the SBA, because that's based off of your gross profit, not your bottom line. Your gross profit is just after you take away your cost of goods sold. If you are doing your math for those applications, you need to know what the terms are, because your expenses are not your cost of goods sold, not all of them. But those two federal programs are awesome because they have low interest rates, but I don't think that they're beneficial for Black-owned businesses, because most Black-owned businesses, like I said, I found most of them don't have accountants, and they don't know how they're, like, if you've applied for the EIDL before and you put in all your expenses, now they're saying they're using your gross profit. You made your gross profit number way too small. And now we're trying to see if we can fix it, right? So there's those programs, but you really need to know what you're applying for and how you're calculating things. So you need resources. The Black community needs to come together with resources that go with the loan programs, so that people can actually benefit from them. If you don't have your paperwork right, you're not going to get your loan forgiven. If you don't do your calculations right, you're not going to qualify for a loan that's going to really help you. All you're going to do is have them run your credit, bring your credit score down, and maybe put yourself in debt. So.
Thank you so much. That was super good info. When we come back around, I want to dig more into, talking about the new bill that came out also. But yeah, that was great info. Thank you so much. And I'll let Kim go ahead and take it from here.
Okay. Czarina Harris, thank you so much for being here to weigh in on these very important topics during COVID-19. So we could just get right into it. How is the crisis affecting ADOS housing regarding home ownership as well as renters? And in your answer, can you give a sense of what the state of ADOS housing was before this crisis?
So I'll start with, can you guys hear me good?
Yes.
I'll start with what ADOS housing was before, because it only gets worse with COVID-19. You could pretty much describe it as a time capsule. So what do I mean by that? We have history, and I'm not picking on Chicago just for the sake of it. Chicago is a very important city in terms of the Fair Housing Act, because they had a lot of lawsuits against the city for land contracts. So they formed the Contract Buyers League, which was basically a civil rights push against these land contracts that were being written to them because they weren't being underwritten by the FHA. So they weren't able to get loans from the government or government-backed loans. And so their landlords would finance them using a land contract, which essentially says you're the owner, but not really. So what it is just a hyped up rental contract. You pay all of the bills, you act like you're the owner, but the problem is that you don't have any equity protections, and you can be evicted within 30 days. And so what was happening, you could have been in the house 4 or 5 years, paid in all this money, made all these repairs to the house, and literally you miss one payment and you can be out on the street. It served as like a 30-day eviction notice, just like that. But you're a homeowner, right? So it's this weird mix and contradiction. So as you can imagine, that was sort of like the genesis of a lot of the predatory lending that happened to Black people back then regarding housing. So they sued the city and they lost, and they sued the city again and they lost. But what it did in those lawsuits was sort of solidified what was happening to Black communities as far as housing. That then led to the 1968 Fair Housing Act, was a lot of their efforts. So like tips off to the redlining and the fight that was in Chicago at the time in the 60s. Fair Housing Act kind of is a stamp, right? It's the stamp, like, where was homeownership? So we're talking about a massive amount of predatory lending, a massive amount of neglect from the government to write loans, redlining, all this other stuff. And at that time, where discrimination essentially was legal in housing, you had a 41.1% homeownership rate. Fast forward to last quarter in 2019, we had a 44% homeownership rate. So it's really just been stuck in time in terms of ownership within the Black community. In addition to that, they came out with new products, one of them being like reverse mortgages, which unfortunately were targeted towards Black communities. So we're talking about Black people, getting this pie in the sky dream of, you're going to give me money to stay in my house. That's great. But then when that person dies, their family's not able to pay off that mortgage. And then, they lose the house. And so really a reverse mortgage is only benefiting the person who took it out, which is like usually silent generation or a baby boomer to do it. So we kind of had this battle where the market is sort of locked in a lot of cities. Like the homes are too expensive for a working class person to even try to buy. Places like California, majorly expensive, New York, places like that. So you're sort of like forced to be a renter in a lot of these markets. And what happened was, with the 2008 crash, Black homeownership and equity and wealth went down by 50%. And we're the only community and race who never recovered from that. But even in that, like at the peak of homeownership, it was only 49%. So you really have in the housing market a very conscious effort to keep Black people renting. And because rent makes people a lot of money, it's a form of wealth extraction, right? So now that you have COVID-19, you have roughly 60% of the Black community who rents, right? And you have a lot of private landlords. And so a lot of people rent houses or whatever. Some people are in apartments, but in terms of how many landlords there are to like corporations, there's actually more individual landlords. So it's roughly like 4 out of 5, depending on who you're asking, but a good solid 75% of landlords own about 5 houses or less. So you're talking about people who use your rent money for their grocery money. Now, all of a sudden, we're in COVID-19 and you can't pay them. And so what are they going to do? They're going to want to evict you, right? Because they're looking for money. There's no compassion or anything that they have to give to you. They're just your landlord. This is kind of their thinking. And so we have a lot of Black people who are worried about being able to pay rent. They might not be working. The ones who are working, they're trying to focus on not being sick. Now their kids are home. So it's like, yeah, you may not have lost your job because you're in some sort of service thing, but now there's added burden because there's more costs coming out. And so in terms of housing for renters, I think COVID-19 has just like understatedly made it way more stressful to make the rent, pay the rent. If you can't and you lost your job, you're trying to get stimulus checks, you're trying to get things on time. There's been like harassment where people have screenshotted their landlords on Twitter, sort of harassing them. I know you got your stimulus check, pay your rent, which is illegal. And, even like I pointed out on Twitter that LA actually came up with its own sort of independent way of handling like rent. And one of the things that was written into their bylaws was like, you as a landlord, you can't ask your tenant to pay rent with the stimulus money, right? Because at that time when they wrote it, we didn't know if it was going to be a one-time thing or if they were going to write another check, like whatever. But there were some landlords sort of shaking their tenants down. And so you have sort of almost this vulture mentality when it comes to landlords and tenants at this time. Some landlords are cool because they have enough money and they can wait for you to miss a few payments and kind of catch up. But for the most part, most landlords don't have very, very many rentals, and they're going to kind of like attack you a little bit in terms of trying to get that rent from you. Home ownership right now, a little bit better. homeownership is, in terms of like being a renter or a homeowner, is always better. There's a lot more leeway if you're a homeowner. So I did read the CARES Act as it related to housing, because that's all I care about. And it said that they were doing very unique things. So one of the things was, right before they started talking about housing, they were talking about credit, right? And so if your credit was good going into the crisis, and then all of a sudden you can't make your payments, you can work it out with whoever you owe that money to where they won't report that your credit is bad. They have to kind of keep it how it was before you entered into the crisis, right? So that's good. So if you're missing payments, it's not going to affect, or it shouldn't affect, your credit, but you have to individually talk to whoever that creditor is to say, hey, I'm being affected, and they won't report it, or they shouldn't. That's the law. So that's what they're talking about with credit. And then when it came to housing, they were giving 180-day forbearance agreements to federally backed loans. So if you were with Fannie Mae, if you have an FHA loan, a VA loan, something like that, then you were going to be granted 180 days of forbearance despite your delinquency. So you don't even have to be delinquent in order to ask for it, right? So it's written in the law, regardless of delinquency. So you don't have to be 30 days behind or 60 days behind or whatever. If you know you're going to be enduring some sort of financial hardship at this time, you can ask your bank, if they're federally backed, to give you a break. Here's the trick though. It's a forbearance and not a deferment. And so a lot of people don't know the difference. What's the difference between a deferment and a forbearance? Deferment, we kind of recognize because a lot of people go to school and they get student loans. So a student loan says you don't have to pay until after you're done with school, right? That's a deferment. They're not adding on anything. They're not adding on any fees. There's no interest. It's just kind of stuck. And then you start paying after. A forbearance means you don't have to pay, but we're still racking up the debt. Okay. So they're still racking up fees. They're still racking up, well, in the law, I don't think they can apply late fees, but they're still racking up the interest that you owe them, right, on your mortgage payment. So what happens in a forbearance is they'll say, okay, we'll give you the 180 days, which is 6 months, which I don't recommend taking that long, to be honest, if you can afford not to. But at the end of the forbearance, guess how many months you owe? 6 months. Who in the world is going to have 6 months worth of payment? Because this is Black life. You always got an emergency. Somebody always need money. Right. And so what I'm going to tell people is, if you're a homeowner right now, if you can afford not to, and I'm just, for real, if you can afford not to get a forbearance, I wouldn't get it, because there's so many things that happen in Black life that the money will find its way to go fix something. Right. And now you're like, it's only $100 out of the mortgage payment. I'm gonna be fine. And then it happens again and it happens again. You see what I mean? So it's very difficult for especially like in this time, to like allocate money elsewhere where it really should go. So if you can afford to like keep paying, you're still working. What it does on the flip side is, if you're able to keep paying, what it shows your lender is that you're a very strong payer, and you can use that as leverage later to get a modification if your payments are too high. Like if you lose hours, you had to get another job, something like that. They're going to say, okay, what happened during COVID-19? And if they see payment, or at least attempted payment, or like half a payment or something like that, they're going to say, this is somebody that we can work with. And you'll have that leverage later on to say, listen, I have a financial hardship. I'm not making as much money as before the crisis. Can you cut me a break and give me a modification?
Ooh, that was some really good information.
Yeah.
Really good, especially the deferment and the forbearance. I'm sure a lot of people probably need that information. So now, all right, what is the impact on the real estate market, short term and long term, due to this crisis of COVID-19?
So what's happening in the real estate market is it's slowing down. And what happens is you always have a buyer and a seller's market. So when the market slows and you're not really selling as well, because I mean, who's going to be out buying houses and touring stuff with realtors anyway, right? So when that slows, it starts to become a buyer's market, which means houses are sitting for longer. And when houses sit for longer, to incentivize people to buy them, what do? They drop the price, right? So the prices go down. So if you're somebody who's looking to buy, right? Or if you were somebody who was in 2019, like, yeah, I really need to buy a house because I'm sick of renting or something like that, this is a good time. If you're somebody who owns the house, you just have to kind of brace for the fact that for a while, your equity is going to come down a little bit just based on the market around you. Your value is going to go down. It shouldn't last a long time. But it is like the market is going to soften. So that's like short term. Long term, it's really up to people's behavior. And what do I mean by that? When we're talking about Black people, this is why I say, if you can afford not to, don't get the forbearance. Because I know I'm speaking to like people like my mom. So my mom's like, what? I could not pay for a while. Like that's how she thinks. So I'm like, no, mama, pay the mortgage, right? And because she always trying to find an opportunity to like sit on her own money or whatever, right? It's not like she's a nurse. She hasn't seen any kind of impact, right? But I just know her mentality. What happens is this: if you say, you know what, I'm gonna get this forbearance, I'll figure it out how to make all that money back and like pay them. 9 times out of 10, it's not going to happen. And what happens is now you legally can't foreclose on anybody until they're 120 days late, right? So you can miss 30s, you can miss 2 payments, you can miss 3 payments. They can't foreclose on you if you're 3 months behind legally. Whatever state you're in, that's a federal law. The moment you hit 120 days, you're in trouble. Okay. So what happens is if somebody takes a 6-month deferment, now you're 2 months into foreclosure area and you can't pay them back. So you're taking this forbearance and you're thinking like you're going to be okay. And all of a sudden now you can get an instant foreclosure because you can't pay them back. Right. So what happens is a lot of people are going to do that, not be able to pay. And in the CARES Act, it says you can take out another 180-day forbearance, which I wouldn't recommend doing, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do. And what happens is the moment you can't pay, they're going to start foreclosure because they've been sitting on your asset with no payments, no money coming in, no revenue stream for them, right? Whoever your lender is. And so what you're going to see is a lot of defaults. You're going to see a lot of people losing their houses. You're going to see a lot of people looking for modifications, a lot of people with hardships, a lot of properties coming back on the market, a lot of REO. That's long-term what's going to happen with this particular crisis. And it's going to be another wealth transfer out of Black community and into the hands of the people we know who can afford to buy. Also long term, and I hate to say this, but like you got to watch your boomer and your silent generation parents, because if they start seeing financial strain, don't be surprised if they get a reverse mortgage to kind of float them through this, right? So be very, very careful with them. Like, hey, if you're struggling, like if you can help them, I don't care. Make sure that you're talking with them, because reverse mortgages are going to, in my opinion, they're going to go up in our community because we need the money, right? Mm-hmm. And so people are going to start getting reverse mortgages to kind of get them through the crisis. They need a little bit of money. And then boom, all of a sudden you come 2-3 years later down the road and you find out, oh snap, mom put a reverse mortgage on the house. We're never going to pay this off. Like you just lost your inheritance due to COVID. So, yeah.
My goodness.
Yeah.
Ooh. Okay. What are there for those who have the privilege of being able to actually invest at this particular time? What about other investments during this particular COVID-19? And also, is it even a good idea, even if you have the money to invest?
It depends on what you're doing. So this is where I got to put my investor hat on. So this is if you can do it. So I'm not trying to like be bootstrapper, like do for self or whatever. But I'm just saying, like, if you can, the unfortunate thing about us is we buy an emotion and we don't take care of opportunities when they're presenting themselves. If there's a market crash, that's the time to buy, because that's when properties are cheap enough for you to afford them. So usually when a market crashes, we get scared, like, nah, I ain't buying no house, like, and we sort of run from it because it's in the middle of crashing, like homes are losing value. But unfortunately, with the real estate market, how it is, this is probably going to be, unless there's another housing crash, this might be for some people the last opportunity for you to even buy a house. Seriously. So come November, December, when houses are just like starting to bottom out, I think we can expect sort of like a 10% decrease, right, in real estate. So if the house is $100,000, it might be going for 90 just to try to move it off the market. That's the time to buy. That's really the time to buy. And so it's funny because like when everything is in panic mode, that's when you have to kind of be smart. And it's very scary to try to make a big purchase like that in the middle of like a pandemic and all this mayhem. But for those who can afford to do so, this is actually a good time just to like wait, hold your money now, don't buy anything right now, and wait for the market to kind of soften as more and more houses come up for sale. And then you'll be able to take advantage. And especially if you wanted to get into like being a landlord or something like that, having rental property and income properties, you could do it. But I would hold off for maybe another at least 4 or 5 months to let the market still kind of bottom out and then kind of see where it is in the last quarter. Because the last quarter, in terms of how banks think, they're trying to shove everything off their books. And so that's when stuff is going to get really cheap. You're going to see a lot of REO and stuff like that. So that would be my recommendation if you can do it. If you're renting and stuff like that and you can't afford to do it, just hold tight, like not saying anything. I'm just saying if you can do it, and if you're into trying to even just buy a house, forget like an investment, just buying a house is an investment in your family, right? So you have to kind of think of it like that. Then you have to start thinking, okay, what can I do? And like I would tell people, go get an app, right? They have like Zillow and they've got like all these other apps where you can put in, how much can I be funded, right? And you put in your salary and your income and all these little things, and they'll say, oh, you can be financed this much. Now it's never a guarantee. And because you're Black, I would put in like a 6% interest rate because you know how they do us. But it'll tell you what you can buy. And if it's within reach and it's always going to be lower than rent, then you start kind of plotting and planning, like if something dips to this price in the market, like we might be able to get in there. So that's kind of
Okay. Lastly, for those of us in this particular crisis who actually are landlords, what should they do?
Hush. No, let me stop. Let me stop. So are we talking about white landlords or Black landlords?
ADOS.
So if you're a Black landlord, y'all need to have a heart because you already know. What I would say, I got to tread lightly here. If you're a Black landlord and you personally know that your tenant is not working, you really need to like have a heart because it's more than likely like your mortgage company can afford to give you a forbearance.
Right.
So you have to start thinking of, okay, if my tenant can't pay me and I can't make that payment, let me contact my lender and see what my lender can do. And based on what your lender can do, have a conversation with your tenant and say, listen, and you're not going to say like, don't pay anything. Just be like, hey, pay $200 a month, right? And just to keep something going. So I know you still want to live here and we can work something out when all of this is over or work something out, moving forward. As a Black landlord, that's kind of almost what you have to do because we don't have it, right? We just don't have it in our community to be that harsh with one another. Besides, no judge is going to give you an eviction anyway, right? So they're not doing that. So you have to kind of play the game right. A lot of people evict because they want to get a new tenant with the money. Well, nobody's going to be moving right now. So even if you evict, who's going to come and rent from you? Everybody's staying in place. So bird in hand is better than two in the bush is what I'm told. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. Okay, back to Tony.
All right, Chris. So let's talk a little bit about some of the legislation in these topics. So, in your estimation, what were some of the problems with the original CARES Act as it relates to ADOS businesses, or some of those first phases of legislation that we got?
For sure. Thank you, Tony. But just before I even say anything, how can I follow any of that, right? I mean, from Czarina and Idara, thank you both for that. I mean, amazing, very sharp, professional, clear, well-informed counsel. But to your question, Tony, some big problems with the CARES Act Part 1, which passed in late March-ish, and then CARES Act Part 2, which passed not too long ago, within the last week or so. But before I even go there, I actually want to frame the discussion, as we do, and talk a little bit about where Black business was right before COVID-19, And myself, I've been very fortunate to be working with and alongside Black-owned businesses here in Northern California, and supporting Black-owned businesses, hundreds of them for several years now, and know really what the condition is like on the ground for Black-owned businesses. Black-owned businesses are struggling. Prior to COVID-19, some 94% of all Black-owned businesses had no employees other than the owner, at least last that we could tell. We don't really collect really good data on Black-owned businesses anymore, too, so that's a big problem, too. But right before COVID-19, some 94% of Black-owned businesses had no employees other than the owner. And as a matter of fact, according to one study by the Association for Enterprise Opportunity, if you broke it down by gender and looked at total revenues on average, if you took a typical business owned by a Black woman, back when this study was conducted, 2017, I believe, typical revenues, or excuse me, average revenues per year were about $14,000, okay, per year total. Okay, for men, it was for businesses owned by Black men, it was about $23,000 per year. So better, but not much better. Both of those, if those are the only sources of revenue for the owner, the person lives in poverty, basically, right? I mean, there's no way to live and subsist and support a family with that as your sole source of income. So I want to reiterate that prior to COVID-19, at least from the data that we can see, if you took the typical Black woman-owned business, that business was bringing in about $14,000 total revenue per year, and for the man, it was about $23,000 total revenue per year. So here comes COVID-19, right? And we have just devastation across the Black business landscape. I've spoken with dozens of Black business owners, connected with hundreds over the last several weeks. We're holding here in Northern California weekly roundtables with Black-owned businesses. Idara has actually been a very, very important part of that work, helping us to work with Black-owned businesses here in the Northern California region and to help revive Black-owned business. But we've seen widespread devastation across Black business, across industry. I have had conversations with business owners who closed businesses within the first week of the crisis. There are, as you know, a few federal efforts to put money into businesses, right? CARES Act 1 and CARES Act 2. And there's some structural flaws within CARES Act 1 and some that we see also that remain in CARES Act 2 that really made it so that we knew from just reading it that Black businesses were going to be written out of this aid for the most part. One of the big structural flaws, I think, was the way that the government decides. Well, first of all, let's just talk straight here. The fact that the money for the PPP goes through the banks is a problem. Okay, it was a big problem because the banks were requiring an existing relationship prior to you getting the money. And by existing relationship, we're talking about an existing line of credit and in many cases an existing business checking account. Different banks had different rules and different criteria, okay, enabled by the legislation. So the way the legislation was written, different banks could have different rules and different criteria. And Idara can attest to this too. She spent most of her time and a lot of her time on the phone with banks and talking to creditors and talking and trying to get what is the application requirement? When is the application going to be up online? These were different for different banks. Okay, so not only did you have one to go through the banks, right? Which in our case, as Black folks, as ADOS folks who descend from the institution of slavery here, right? We have had a long history of very bad relationships with banks in our community. So any type of business funding legislation that writes in, you have to have a good relationship with a bank, is automatically going to write out a lot of Black-owned businesses. That's a structural flaw right there. Not to mention all the other problems with banks having different requirements for different banks, right? So a big problem there. Also, a big problem in the legislation. It relates very much to the fact that Black-owned businesses have fewer employees on average. So the way that these loans work is, in many cases, they're based on how many employees you have. The more employees you have, typically, the more money you can get. Right. The payroll formula or the lending formula for the PPP is you take your last year's average payroll, right? You divide it by 12, I think, and then you multiply it by 2.5, right? So the formula itself means and says that the more employees you have, the more money you can get. The higher your payroll, the more money you get. That's written into the formula. That's written into the law. That's a structural flaw because it structurally advantages businesses with more employees. That's just how the law is written. Quiet is kept. These are also loan programs. Business owners that I've talked to, while they are grateful that in many cases these loans can be forgiven, they're very hesitant to take on any new debt right now, right? So they would prefer grants. To be honest with you, the loans do not. They make us less safe right now, especially when we don't know what this economy is going to be like. Next week, 2 weeks from now, 2 months from now, later on this year. Those are a couple of the big structural flaws within the legislation as it originally was passed. CARES Act 1. CARES Act 2 did make some changes to how money was moved, but nothing big and nothing big enough to include Black-owned businesses, at least from what I can tell, in any significant way. There was a $60 billion carve out in the second version of the CARES Act for community banks. But one, the problem is it still goes through the banks, right? So you still have that problem, right? And two, the way they structured that $60 billion carve out, 30 billion of it is for banks with assets between 10 and $50 billion, and then another 30 billion is for banks with less than $10 billion in assets. Those are that's not the kind of funding weighting that we want to see if we're trying to get Black businesses more funding, right? We would technically want to overweight it to the banks with the lower assets, because those are typically going to be banks that we do more business with, if we're doing business with banks at all, right? And again, we go back to that original problem. We are not, we don't have good relationships with banks at all. In some cases, no relationships with banks. There were some attempts by the Treasury and some attempts by Congress in the second CARES Act to claw back some of the funds that went to these huge businesses and the Lakers and Ruth's Chris and Shake Shack and all that good stuff. So there was an attempt in this new effort to do that, but structurally, fundamentally, not much has changed. And that's a big problem, because Black-owned businesses are really, really hurting right now.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks so much for that, Chris. So just a follow up to that, what are some possible solutions for current legislation, ways that we can utilize what's there for ADOS to get something, or pushes that we could make for upcoming legislation?
Yeah, so that's a good question, Tony. So from the advocacy perspective, right, one, there are a couple ways to approach it. The first way to approach it is you could fix and seek to amend in the next round of legislation and next round of bailouts, which are coming from what we understand. Fix all the problems that we just talked about, but particularly the two big fundamental flaws. One, that you want to remove the banks or minimize the role of the banks as much as possible. I would eliminate the banks from their current role within the PPP program. I would recommend that the SBA fund the EIDL program, the EIDL program, which Idara talked about, in a similar way, because in a similar way as it does with the PPP program, because right now the EIDL program doesn't go through the banks, or at least it's funded directly through the SBA. But the EIDL program got $10 billion in the CARES Act, or first CARES Act got $10 billion, second CARES Act got another $10 billion, whereas the PPP got $349 billion in the first CARES Act, and then another $310 billion in the second CARES Act. So you see that the fund that drives capital through the banks is overcapitalized with respect to with respect to the EIDL program, which is more Black business friendly. So one thing, another legislative fix here, in addition to removing the banks, you could technically fund the EIDL program either in a similar way, or just beef up the funding for the EIDL program, which, as Idara also said, it's not taking applications right now. That's a better fit, at least in theory, for Black businesses over the PPP program. A couple of other legislative fixes too, right? So one, get rid of the banks, fund the EIDL program. Really take a look at that lending formula because it's structurally bad. Any formula, any lending, and any award formula that advantages businesses with more employees is going to be bad for Black-owned businesses. So we need an alternative lending formula written into the law that the banks or the SBA must use. So those are a few fairly simple legislative fixes, right? There's another alternative too, which would be to carve out within any new legislation, carve out a specific set aside for Black-owned businesses. Okay, carve out a specific grant funding, a specific new forgivable loan funding, and possibly even look at some new contracting for Black-owned businesses specifically targeted within this new legislation or any new legislation that's coming up. So you have a couple of different approaches. You could fix what's bad about the one that's there now, or you could create a whole new one that's specifically for our folks.
Thank you for that. So kind of follow up to that in terms of, so we've talked about what should change in the legislation, but here at Black Civics, one of the things that we're really big on, obviously, is the actual civic engagement for ADOS. So what are things that, whether you're a small business owner, whether you're a homeowner, a renter, or just someone that's concerned about how all of this has had an impact on ADOS, what are some ways that we can advocate politically, or things that people should be doing either with their local government or with the federal government in order to make a change?
I'll take a stab at that. Then definitely, if others have thoughts, please feel free to jump in. So one, I'm a community organizer at heart. So the first thing I say is find other people who are in a similar situation like you, and join up and join forces with them. If you're here in the Northern California area, check out, find ADOS Sacramento, find Sac Black Biz, right? Find Max Reach, find Black business groups that are organizing and that are bringing other Black businesses together specifically. So first thing you want to do is organize. There's no way that this doesn't happen. There's no way that this happens without solid organizing among the Black business community, which really hasn't been very organized, at least from what we can tell. And so organize, right? The second thing, though, is to advocate, right? And so we've been encouraging folks to reach out to their legislators and their government officials at every single level. We've been putting out through ADOS Sacramento and all out through all of the ADOS channels. We have a couple of scripts out right now, a call and an email script that you can use. But make your voice heard, right? Advocate. Call your legislator. Call your congressman. Email. Show up and visit in person. Now that's not very doable right now because of the pandemic. But most of the legislators are doing virtuals and doing calls and conference calls. So show up and pull up to a Zoom meeting. Pull up to a conference call. All right. Make sure that that Black businesses' voices are not ignored right now, especially right now. Yeah. Let me stop there. Definitely want to get some other thoughts.
So I'll give a few things. One thing that we can't forget is before COVID came, we as a community were really struggling with the fact that a lot of where we live was now opportunity zones, right? And so we already had sort of the eyeballs of predatory capital coming in, and they're going to start gentrifying. Now you're combining that with a softer market where things get cheaper. And so, you have to kind of think, it's hard being Black sometimes. You got to think about everything. And so, you got to worry about being sick and being the demographic that's sort of becoming the face of the disease. But then you also got to think about, how am I going to continue to support myself as far as the roof over my head and not get gentrified out of here in 6 months when all the capital comes in, because houses are cheaper. So that's one thing. But then we also have to talk about the homeless, right? Because we're 50% of homeless families and 40% of the overall homeless. So people don't even have a home, right? What are they doing? And how are they being taken care of? Because you can't be out on the street and have diseases just running rampant. They're not going to take care of you at the hospital anyway, because you're ADOS. They're just not. They're not going to believe you. They're not going to. And so you're ADOS and homeless. So it's really critical right now that everybody kind of pay attention to that. And I really hate to be morbid, but like there's a lot of our elderly who are dying. So you really have to kind of get a grip on finances, make sure the house is secure if something ever happens to grandma or grandpa or whatever, because that's the last thing you want to do is come out the other end of this and like lose your inheritance, right? Because somebody died and you weren't able to take care of a situation or take over or anything like that. So unfortunately, it's just an added burden on top of the oppression that we already have in this country. But you really have to pay close attention to housing, especially if you have family members who own something, because there's going to be a lot of predators trying to get at that, right? Like, hey, we'll pay you to stay here, so be very, very mindful that you are the face of renters. They don't want you to own anything. Right. And so it's only going to be amplified now. I think homeownership, as far as our community, and I have to say Black because they don't distinguish ADOS. But when I say Black, it's ADOS. It's still slipping. Right. And so a lot of the homeowners that we have now are only homeowners because they're boomers. And so what are they going to do to try to get through the crisis? And you have to kind of talk to them. Don't get a reverse mortgage. Like, let us know if you need help or whatever. So that would be my last little warning to what's going to happen. But yeah, it's going to get rough.
Tony, can I jump in real quick? Just add one more thing, if you don't mind, on this question, because there's one other thing. So what can we do, right? Community organize, public advocacy, right? Community service, okay, and community relief. Sometimes, and this may just be the way I was brought up in organizing, but sometimes you don't see you helping out the unhoused and the homeless in your area, or providing some sort of community service for the elderly in your area, folks who can't get groceries. Sometimes you don't see that as political. There's nothing more political about that, right? Like that's some of the most political stuff you could do, right? Is actually serve your community right now, especially since we have government agencies that are not doing their job at all. Some of work with us with ADOS Sacramento. We are regularly supporting at least one homeless camp here in the Sacramento area, and we've been, since the crisis has unfolded, we've been out to the camp. We've been giving out sandwiches. We've been giving out flyers, information. We've been having conversations with people. Some folks who are unhoused did not even know there was a virus going on, right? Because you take for granted the fact that you get information, right? As somebody who is a part of the the housed world, get involved in your community's relief efforts safely, but get involved in your community's relief efforts as best you can right now too is another thing that we can do. That's some of the most political work you can do. If you think back to the Panthers, if you think back to our own history and our heritage here as political activists, that's what we do. We serve on the ground, right? And there's nothing right there. So that's one other thing that I want to add to. Please get involved with the community service.
Yeah. We absolutely can't forget about our homeless, because we're the only people who are going to care about them, honestly.
So true.
I think Idara. I think
you're muted, Idara.
Sorry about that. So if I can say anything too, you give in the way that you can.
Yep.
Right. So if you can't go out, you give the way you can. Everybody can help somehow. I keep seeing people say I'm an essential worker, and everybody has something that they're doing that's essential. Everybody, I mean, everybody has a skill that's somehow essential in this world today. It might not be what you think it is, okay? Because I'm technically an essential worker because I also work in a hospital. But I looked at the hospital and I looked at my community. So I work in a hospital, but I also have a degree in accounting and an accounting background. And I said, really, right now, where is it more essential that I put my time and my effort? I could be at work making money right now, but instead I'm doing consults to people for free. And so everybody can help. You might be able to do something that you didn't even think about. My kid took sewing lessons like 7 years ago. She's over here sewing masks, like everybody. And she was like, Mom, I have a sewing machine in the garage. And I was like, take the sewing machine out, because I had friends in the hospital who needed masks. So I was like, I can get you guys I can tell my kid to sew some masks for you. She can figure it out. Everybody has something and my other ones, they can't do it. They were sewing them by hand, the little ones. So they were sitting in there stitching up masks, and we put some in envelopes and mailed them out to people that we knew needed masks because they had things they needed to do, Right now, everybody can give back because the way I see it is this is a global thing. Mm-hmm. And if you look out for people, it comes back to you, right? Yeah. It's always like you treat how you want to be treated. And especially for those in this community, I mean, I was raised that you look out for each other, in any way that you can. Chris, I can't go out there and pass out sandwiches, but hey, I could drop off some bread, and so it just depends on what you can do, right? Everybody can do something, or I could tell you when there's toilet paper at Costco. Everybody can do something.
Right. They got it, girl. They got it. Go get
it. Right. And then also what you were saying about the legislation, advocate, because they keep changing the laws and rules on these loans and programs every single day. I had to look. So before I even do a call, I have to look and say, how did the world change now versus this morning? Yeah. And it's crazy because they are making out. Let me just give you guys one example. They said as long as you were in business for the PPP, you can qualify as long as you're in business by February 15th. But yet the applications take a 12-month average. Thank you. So if you're going to take that, they're automatically, and a lot of the calculators just automatically divide what number you put in there by 12. So why are they coming up with criteria and don't come up with the calculations for that? They barely came up with it today. Right. You know how long does it take the banks to redo their systems? By the time they redo it, the money will be gone again.
It's gone. Yeah.
So this is what happened the first time. This is what's happening the second time. And then they're saying if it's your bottom line. No, I'm sorry, but any business class you ever take, they're going to tell you your first year in business, you're probably not going to make a profit. Right. So if you don't have a profit on line 31, guess what? You disqualify for that program. So people really need to speak up when they're being sent out notices saying, sorry, you don't qualify. Or when they go on to these applications and they're actually seeing that, they're asking for stuff that I don't have. Why do you asking for a 2019 Schedule C when they extended the tax deadline to July 15th? Exactly. How are you requiring something that's not yet required? On tricks. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So who benefits from that? The person who has a tax person. Who doesn't benefit from that? The person who's barely trying to figure out how to buy food and now I got to pay the tax guy? I can't get that done. Right? Then you're going to try to sit there and do your Schedule C yourself, mess it up, and then they're going to come knocking on your door in a couple of months. People really need to find the community organizations that are speaking up and speak up. Our voice needs to be louder because you hear the little stories. I hear them because I'm actually working with businesses, but almost everyone I work with, they don't know. They're like, I don't know how to do this. And the other thing is that they took away the legislation. They said that we're supposed to do this for free, agents, accountants, whatever, to help people. Right. We can't charge, but then they're not making the banks accept our applications for agents. So how are you going to, so the people who would be in the community helping to do this, when I first started doing this, there were all kinds of accountants and we were just like, okay, cool. We'll be able to, because a lot of our clients are like, their business is closed. Like if your business is closed, I'm not going to tell you, pay me bookkeeping this month. I'm not going to ask for that. So we were like, okay, this is a way for us to get income. Then they said, no, you can't charge to help people. get it from the banks. We were like, okay, we'll get it from the banks. And the banks were like, yeah, no, we're not splitting our profit with you.
Wow.
So people just stopped helping. You understand? Like they made it too hard. So when you're running into these problems, people really need to make their voice heard. When there's programs where you can't find anyone to help you because people, you don't have any money to pay them. Even if you had money, the people are like, I can't take it, you know? And the application doesn't fit your situation. And the bank is saying that you had to have a relationship, like you had to have a genie ball, and you had to have known this was going to happen in order to have it happen, be able to put the application in. We need to join our forces and say, you know, there's 50,000 people that weren't able to apply. You guys keep asking for, even the polls I see, they're like, what happened when you applied, like with your application? What happened when you tried to apply and realized, I don't even know what I'm doing, and you just stopped?
It's terrible anyway, because the SBA has a history of discriminating against ADOS anyways.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's like you're sending it. You might as well have sent that thing to the KKK. Okay, go get some money from over there. Okay.
And
Let's
then you
see
see
how
these
that
big
works.
companies, like I just saw the one today, the Lakers got one. And I'm like, really? So if I'm trying to advocate for my client, and then someone from the Lakers calls in, they're gonna hang up on me and just be like, give me your paperwork.
Yeah.
So they also need to redefine the idea of a small business, because 500 people is not small.
True.
Mm-mm. No, it's absolutely not.
You know, they really need to redefine, and just remember, the people who are writing these laws, they've never lived, they can't even imagine what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck, you know?
No.
So they're writing the laws, and like, everybody has a few bank accounts, and not everybody's friends with the banker, and not everybody does that. So you just have to remember who are writing the laws. I mean, in the beginning, I was real optimistic. When things started coming out, I had to stop and take a step back and be like, who's running the country and who's making these laws?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have a problem. We need to like join forces and really, you know, if we could do a call and get everybody on there and do a head count, you know, show our faces of really who's missing out, how many businesses are here, new businesses, all of these people that are just missing out on all these programs. Because if our businesses don't survive, it's going to affect everybody, right? Yeah. It's not just a business, it's your livelihood. It's your life's work. It's going to be, you know, you're not only going to not be able to provide for yourself, but you're not gonna be able to provide for your family, your kids, you know, you can't help your parents. You can't do anything. How are you gonna help the community if you can't help yourself? Right?
Yep.
So,
yeah.
Wow, thank you for that. Thank you for that. So we are going to take I think we have at least one question that someone sent in ahead of time, and then we are going to take questions from the viewers. We won't go too long, take maybe 5 questions or so from the viewers. Kim, did you have the question that was already submitted? Or?
No, I didn't.
Okay, I can go ahead and let me pull that up. So this was a question submitted from Twitter, and you know, anyone can take answering this. With all of the elder ADOS deaths we're hearing of, what do you think the ADOS homeownership rate will be after COVID-19, considering that most of them were homeowners and ADOS millennials are not? Oh, you know, this is actually specifically for Czarina.
Kim, you want to answer that? No.
Czarina can give her input.
So how is this affecting home ownership, basically?
Yeah,
considering millennials don't own anything.
Mm-hmm.
So what's unique about millennials is like white millennials don't really have anything in terms of like other white people. Like they have more than us, but in terms of other white people, they don't have much. And so what's interesting is like being a Black millennial is as close as you're gonna get to being a peer with somebody who don't have anything either. The problem is that they have parents and grandparents who are going to pass down everything to them. So they're going to be broke with you in college. And then when they graduate and grandma dies because she had COVID or whatever, then that goes to their parents. And now a lot of the elderly are thinking about, well, you know, they're thinking about mortality. So they're already starting to put things into play to pass it down. So what's going to happen is if you don't start talking to your family about where's this house going? Okay. Mm-hmm. And what's the life insurance look like? Do we have any life insurance? Like if you don't start having these hard conversations, and I know in terms of like ADOS life, sometimes it's hard to have financial conversations. And it's hard to have a conversation like this house isn't worth what you're paying on or whatever. Like anything that's a hard conversation, especially in regards to like what your inheritance is. Like if your grandparents own even a dilapidated house is better than nothing, right? Because it's still a structure. And so you can't really think of it like, well, I don't want that house anyway. Let me tell you something. When you homeless, that house looks like a palace, right?
Yeah.
And you're probably one rent payment away from being evicted. So let's be honest, like how close that line is. So in terms of COVID-19 and all this other stuff, I think really what it's doing is forcing people to have a conversation, or at least creating the environment where you have to have these conversations with your parents, your elders, or whatever. And also, you know, if you can consolidate houses, you might want to do that. You know, it sucks. And it's just kind of like, but if you're renting and you're renting and you're renting and like we ain't got it between all of us, maybe we can talk and have a conversation about what this really looks like moving forward. Because, you know, all that independent stuff is going to go out the window, to be honest. Some people are going to be losing houses, moving in with family. So you might as well have the conversation like, do we have room to do that? Yes, no. Is Uncle Betty coming, or, you know, Uncle Tony coming over here with Aunt Betty? Because, you know, we can't afford them, you know, whatever. Like those are the conversations you're going to have, especially now. And especially like, unfortunately, as people are dying, right? If somebody dies and they ain't got a will, probate courts are not open, right? And so like these are real conversations that you have to have with your family. So that's kind of what I see COVID doing is the boomers who do have stuff are the most at risk. And if they start dying out or they start getting affected or they start thinking, maybe I'll get a reverse mortgage, it's going to be a very bad predicament for you. So start having the conversations about what this stuff looks like, and start looking into trusts. Like a lot of Black people are scared to like put stuff in their name. Get a trust, right? Like, I don't have nobody I trust. Well, that's a different problem. All right, I can't solve that. You ain't got one person in your life you trust. I can't solve that.
Yeah.
But like really start thinking about these kinds of things, because, you know, this is what white people think about, you know, and they think about that and how they're going to take what you have.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, you have to have these conversations.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Yeah.
And this next question is kind of for anyone. Regarding this fourth phase of legislation that just came out, is there anything in this new bill that may help ADOS small businesses, or that may help in terms of real estate? And how can they ensure that they get those funds, if there is anything in this new bill that is helpful at all?
Is that a question for me?
Sure, you can take it away.
No, well, I got to answer all the questions. So repeat the question. If there's anything in this new bill,
I mean, I'm happy to give it a shot.
In this new bill that just came out, I think it came out last week. Is there anything in this either for real estate or for small businesses? Either one.
Well,
I haven't read the new bill. So.
I have parts of it, like I said, like it updates for me for the financial, the small businesses and the programs, the loans, that it updates every single day. So today they just came out with an executive order that actually is now giving them the calculations for seasonal workers and for new businesses. Well, seasonal workers. So they're saying you can go and look at 12 weeks back if you're a new business. And they're also, you know, like I said, for small businesses, new businesses, they're looking at that 12-month period. So they're doing that. They're actually putting the calculations out, even though they've said it, you know, it's been since the 3rd, and it's now the 28th. So 25 days later, they've come up with the calculation in the new bill. And they also, like I said, they allotted $60 billion to the small community banks. That was their way of trying to reach more people. They also took away the stipulation that you can only apply at one institution. So you can apply multiple places, because what's happening is they're running out of money. And if you think about it, you go to a big bank, they have 30 million clients. You go to a small bank, they have 5,000 clients. You're at the end of the line in both of them, right? With your application, which line would you rather be at the end of? So now you can apply a bunch of places, and you don't know how many applications they have sitting there. So you can apply multiple places. What people were doing, they would apply, and then they found out, oh, my application was still sitting on someone's desk when the money ran out. they're actually, they're listening, and they're actually starting to implement some of the things that people were complaining about. That's what I could say came out in the new bill, right? They put some more money out there, and then they actually started, people were saying, how can we apply? They don't have the calculations, or the banks are closed. The banks start taking applications? Where are we supposed to go? That was the main thing I saw that they did. They also put in that the order that said that businesses that received, that they clarified the need for receiving the funds, because it's before they said, like, if you were negatively affected by COVID-19, like, who wasn't negatively affected, right? People think like the world's going to end because they can't go outside, or they can't go to the beach, they can't get their nails done. I'm like, no, there's worse things like dying. But so at first it was saying negatively affected. So that's why you see all these big companies. And it was not even right now. It was like, if you foresee something negatively affecting your company. Now they've clarified the language, saying that if your business has not been negatively affected and you took out a PPP, you have until May 7th to return it back. So I'm guessing that after that, they're going to start actually really looking into who received funds and asking you for proof of, why did you apply for this? How's your business doing? So they gave them until May 7th to give the money back, which to me says after May 7th, they're going to start doing something, because people complain, those posts went viral. But I mean, that's one of the things that are coming out. They're not in the law. So every single day they're adding like little addendums to it. And you find them on the U.S. Treasury website, and then they have a date. And on every single day you'll find something new up there. So, I mean, it came out with it. And it came out as a result of it, because the new bill, when the money ran out, people start talking about it. And then because of that, I mean, it was already in the process of being going through, being passed. So they couldn't add it into the bill, but they started putting all these addendums in, and putting dates in and clarifying the language in the original bill. So, I mean, that's what I see coming out. And like Chris said, they're going to have a new bill coming out, number 4 and a number 5, and they're even going to have to change the date. They said June 30th on the PPP. If you can't get the money out until the middle of May, how are you going to say 8 weeks has to be over by June 30th? Simple math is going to say that's like 6 weeks, right? Not 8.
Right. So
the bills are going to have to constantly change. But I guess they're trying. They're trying.
Yeah.
Tony, I wanted to add something to that too, just a little bit, just to follow up with what both Idara and Czarina said here. So, in terms of the what's better about this new bill than the last bill? Again, structurally, not much, right? Because again, the big structural impediments for our people are the fact that the banks are running this program, and that the money goes to the banks for the bigger program, right? And also the lending formula and the award formula is built in a way that advantages businesses with more employees. So those are two fundamentally structural problems. Those haven't changed yet. There was the carve out for the smaller banks, like we said, some issues around how that was weighted too, right? I do think though that I get the sense that Congress was listening to a lot of the feedback that they were getting. I don't think they got it right in the second try here. I know they're working on a third try and some more tries, but I do think at least it looked like they were starting to make some marginal changes around the edges for this second bill that it's walking along the right path. It's just walking very, very slowly, and by the time it gets to where it needs to be, it's going to be too late. To be honest with you, I like the fact that they put another $10 billion in the EIDL loan. By EIDL we mean economic injury disaster loan. I like the fact that another $10 billion went in there. I think that needs to be multiplied by 10, to be honest, because that is the more black business friendly program, right? That doesn't go through the banks at all. That goes straight through the SBA. But if I had to give it a grade, you know, I mean, it's still not passing with respect to what our businesses need.
Yeah. Man, situation's dire. So before we kind of wrap up here, does anyone else have, any additional comments to make or anything they want the audience here at Black Civics and those live to know? Any information on resources or anything else they should be doing right now?
I just want to put in a little word for I think what this whole thing has done is really point a picture on how important local politics is, in terms of like the government basically shoving it off to the states, and even how insufficient our organizations are. If we get one more town hall where they blame Black people for being the face of COVID, I'm going to scream, right? And they don't hear us when we're saying like, no, this doesn't help us. This doesn't help our businesses. And so I think now is a time, if you're an ADOS and you've been sort of struggling to get your family or your friends on board in terms of like what we're pushing for and what we're talking about, now is the time to really have that serious conversation. Like, this is what we've been talking about for the past 3 years, and now it's in your face. Now you understand you don't have any money. Now you understand you need help. Now you understand when the government picks winners and losers, we're always the losers. So that's like, this is the time. And then the second thing I wanted to bring up was when they decided to do the stimulus package, there was a lot of chatter like, oh, y'all could write this check for $6 trillion, but you can't do reparations. And so to kind of keep that conversation going, but also understand how much more involved you need to be, because they wrote a check for small businesses and the vultures came. If they willy-nilly try to write a reparations check, white people going to take 50% of it. They're going to figure it out. So that is the time where you get politically involved and you say, nope, we need very specific redress. It has to look like this. And the only thing we're going to do is just get friends, get family members, get your family chapter, as Princess Six would say, get them on board. Because if they're not going to listen to you now when they're really hurting, they ain't going to listen to you for the rest of the year.
That's facts right there.
Fire. I will add, if Idara, you don't want to jump in here, I have one just to plug for one. Idara as an amazing business resource. Idara has been volunteering her time, partly because the legislation was written bad and they won't let us pay her, right? Which is another problem. Okay, but it's been an amazing resource, as well as a number of other business professionals. I just want to highlight her as someone who has been providing amazing pro bono service. We've been meeting, doing roundtable discussions with Black business owners here in Northern California 3 times a week, Wednesdays at 3 p.m., Saturdays at 9 a.m., Sundays at 1 p.m., every single week for many weeks now, talking with dozens of Black-owned businesses, and offering free advice, free coaching, free counseling. The Stack Black Biz service, which we run here in Northern California, which is a program that I helped start several years ago, provides free marketing and free social media marketing specifically for Black-owned businesses. So that is a resource for you as well. If you're a business owner and you want some additional pump in your marketing right now, that is a resource that's there for you. You're also totally invited to join us for the Wednesday roundtables and the Saturday and Sunday workshops. If you're a business owner and you need some high quality professional advice from the likes of Idara, we are regularly bringing on folks from inside the SBA who are joining us for these roundtables to talk to Black-owned businesses. I want to shout out Corey Williams with the SBA, who's been joining us to provide direct consult and direct coaching to Black-owned businesses in a way that we don't get it. Right, we usually are the last person to find out something, and we get it from the least quality source, right? And it's too late. I want to shout out these professionals because they've stepped up to give us the good game very early, very fast, in the most high professional way. So just want to make that known as a resource that's available out there.
We're building up our community.
Yep.
That to me, it's awesome. I mean, helping all these business owners and meeting all these people. You're meeting like-minded people. And I have had so many people say, I wanted to find other people who were like this, but I didn't know where to find them. It's funny because we're sheltered in place and we're all stuck in our homes, and we're meeting more people now than ever before, right? So you're making all these connections, and we just have to make sure that after Corona, we don't forget about everybody. It doesn't stop, you know, it just grows. I keep telling people I can't wait to actually meet you in person, you know? So I'm like, after this, we're having a barbecue. We can all go outside. But you know, I think it's awesome that we're making these connections and we're seeing that the support is there. You know, it's there within our community. And so if we just reach out to each other and you know, network. I'm trying to network as many people as possible. I thought networking was like something corny people did. Like, you know, you go to those little talk for 2 minutes and move to the next person. But this is networking, right? Every single time you stop and talk to somebody, you know, grow your network of people, you know. It's a wonderful thing. And together, I mean, what we haven't said is, why don't we have any Black banks so we don't have to worry about nothing? Right? That's what week I keep thinking. I was like, we need to really think about what we need to do next time.
There we go. That's why we ain't got no Black banks right there.
There you go.
I mean, I'm like, seriously, I'm like, as many problems as we're having, I can't even find a Black banker to send people to, not to mention a Black, like, we really need to think and put our minds together, because we're so talented. We're spread out in a lot of places, or we're not thinking about it. But if we put our minds together, we can do great things. But yeah, my thing is like, we need to use this as a stepping stone. So the next time something like this happens, because this isn't going away. This is not going to go away. And because they shut down the world once, I think they'll be like, oh, we can shut it down again, you know, but the next time something happens, we'll be prepared.
Okay.
Definitely. And where can everyone find the three of you on social media?
Don't find me. Leave me alone.
Twitter.
You can find me on Twitter at Czarina Harris.
All right.
Okay, so my kids are old, so they say I have like the old people Instagram. I still have Facebook. That's all I have.
Ain't nothing wrong with that.
It's Idara Phillips.
Okay.
So.
And I'm Chris, ADOS Sacramento. You can find me at ADOS Sacramento. Chris Lodgson, Facebook, Twitter. Chris does ADOS Politics. Instagram, Sac Black Biz. Facebook, Sac Black Biz. Yeah.
You're doing too much, Chris, but okay.
I'm doing a lot. I'm about to get more busy. I got some watch.
All right, cool.
Awesome. Kim, take us out.
Okay. I would like to thank our three very special guests for educating our community. Black Civics' own Chris Lodgson, Czarina Harris, CEO of the Note Firm, and Idara Phillips, owner of Zip Business Services. And a very special thank you for everyone who tuned in to part 1 of this Black Civics very special COVID-19 series. Please tune in to part 2 of this series, where we will dig into personal finance and welfare, and we'll discuss the impact COVID-19 and all these new bills have had on the ADOS community in regards to our personal finances and general welfare. The date and time of part 2 of this very important series will be announced on our Black Civics Facebook page. So don't forget to subscribe and also share this. And as you know, Black Civics is an educational program dedicated to supporting the ADOS community through podcasts, videos, and courses that will elevate our civic awareness. Together, we discuss politics and government, public policy, political activism, and much more, all in a way that's easy to understand and helps you learn. Black Civics is brought to you by Kimberly Renee Davis, Tony Brown, and Chris Lodgson. Good evening, family. Have a good night.
Bye, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Great work, y'all.
Thank you.